Chapter 11. You think this is a game? William cursed at Vespa. She sat quietly holding her arm. She wouldn't look him in the eyes. Vespa had a couple scratches and bruises on her face. William turned and grabbed her face. She whimpered at the force. What? No smart remarks. Her eyes strayed from his face. He shook her head, making her look at him. Either they die, or you die. Do you understand me? Marina may be your boss, but no one screws me over. He paused. She didn't answer him. Do you understand me? He screamed in her face, gripping her harder. Vespa nodded her head. He let her go and placed his hands on his hips. William stared down at her. Laura, his secretary, walked in. Excuse me, sir, do we need to push the meeting back? Or she looked up from her papers and grew silent when she saw Vespa. He turned to her. No, the meeting will be on time. Gather the board members early tomorrow. He turned and walked to his desk. Laura nodded and walked out. Vespa sat quietly, looking at the floor. William cleared his throat. Don't you have a job to do? He asked her as he looked through numbers on his phone. Vespa got up from the chair slowly and shuffled to the door. The hotel. Nate jumped awake, grabbing his side in pain from the jump. He looked around the dark room and then at the clock. It was 4 a.m. He slowly sat up in pain. He looked over to the other bed. Paige was fast asleep. Nathaniel rose from the bed slowly, almost falling back from the pain, but he caught himself on the nightstand. He thought the noise had woken her. He stood still as she turned on her other side and went back to sleep. Nathaniel slowly shuffled to the bathroom, each step sending pain throughout his body. He reached the bathroom and slowly closed the door. Turning the light on, he examined his wound closer. The bullet went through clean, right under his ribs. Nathaniel leaned on the sink for a moment. How could he have been so stupid? He almost got them both killed. His anger made his wound hurt worse. Gripping the sink tightly, he slowly raised his head, looking at himself in the mirror. You know what you have to do, he told himself. Nate couldn't allow her to become like him. She had a future and all he had was death. Death ruled his life and he didn't want that for her. Even though he had become numb to this world and everything in it, he couldn't allow this girl to lose her innocence. He turned out the light and walked back into the room. He watched her sleep for a moment before packing his things. He wrote a note and left it on the bed on his side. He turned one last time towards her. He held his side and shook his head before walking out. The morning light crept into the hotel room. Paige stood looking over the empty spot where Nate had lain. The blood-stained sheets marked the spot where he had been. Paige squeezed her hand in anger and then opened it. A piece of paper floated to the ground. It was wrinkled, and 2 bold words could be seen. Go home, the same words he had uttered to her before all this happened. Her face was red with anger. She quickly packed her things, huffing and grunting. How could he, that son of a, she screamed. She kicked over the table and chairs. Paige grabbed the bag and stormed out of the hotel room. As Paige waited on the curb for a taxi, she plotted out what she was going to do. Paige was still furious that he had left her. After everything they had been through, he had left her alone. Chapter 12. Paige looked out of the taxi window at the police station. As she clutched a large box, her breath showed on the glass as she said nervously, "So ma'am, what will it be?" The taxi driver asked as he sat parked. She looked at the driver, then back to the building. She was so undecided. Paige was scared to go inside alone. If she told the police, Nathaniel could get in trouble as well. Even though she hated him for leaving her, she couldn't allow him to get in trouble. Her hands reached onto the handle of the car. Paige sat for a moment more as she looked down at the box. It contained everything she had gathered on William, as well as all the information that Nate told her. The whole conspiracy in this one box. It was crazy, but it was the truth. The whole CIA and cartel spreading to make one world criminal organization. They were going to think Paige was crazy. She was still undecided if she should go in or not. To tell the truth and get her company back or stay on the run by herself. Board members from both companies filed into the room. Mitch took a seat on the other side with his fellow members. He was not in the happiest of moods, and it showed on his face. William was the last one to enter the room. He walked proudly to the end of the table and sat down. "I don't know why you called this meeting." Mitch spoke up. "I'm sorry, what was that?" William asked with a grin. Mitch got even more flustered. He knew William heard him. "I said, I don't know why you called this meeting. I'm not signing over this company to you." Mitch scowled. "Oh no, Mr. Glass, you see Ms. Welsh is the owner of the company, and with her being missing, soon it will be up for grabs." William smiled and twisted in his chair. "You son of a..." Mitch shook his head. "You have her, don't you?" he yelled. "Mr. Glass, how dare you insinuate that I have Ms. Welsh? I would never do such a thing as low as kidnapping someone." He smirked. "No, but you can have them killed." Mitch snapped back. "Mr. Glass, please calm down," a board member said. No, I will not settle down." "Where is Paige?" he screamed. Paige made her way into William Green's company main building. People scurried around doing their various jobs. Many didn't even notice Paige. She slowly crept in through the front door, her big dark glasses covering much of her face. His was the same building where the meeting was being held. She was there to break up that meeting and hopefully settle everything with William. Paige looked around cautiously as she made her way to the main desk. She smiled at the receptionist as she signed in. The woman didn't even pay attention to who she was. Paige placed the pen down as the receptionist handed her a badge. Paige slowly slid the badge off of the counter and clipped it to the bottom of her shirt. Paige then turned slowly and made her way down the main hall of the building. She passed up the many secretary guards along the way. They paid her no mind. Paige then made her way to the stairs. She placed her hand on the rail and went to take her first step. Before her foot could hit the stair, a deep voice whispered in her ear. "Mr. Glass, I advise you listen to your fellow board member and settle down. We are all here to have a calm and civilized discussion." William spoke up. Mitch couldn't even look at William. He twirled his chair around facing the other wall. William placed a hand over his mouth to hide the smirk that crept on his face. The other board members chatted amongst themselves. The door opened and in entered the Latino male. He walked over and took a seat beside William. "Ah, Mr. Alvarez. It is a pleasure for you to be able to attend, being you just bought plenty of shares in the Welsh company." William turned the chair. "Yes, I just hope that it is well worth the investment. Between you and Mr. Glass, I have heard many good things about it." Alvarez spoke as he looked between Mitch and William. "I heard screaming down the hall." The Latino unbuttons his suit jacket. "In the event that either family member of the company is unable to run, the company falls over to me, William. You know this." Mitch growled. "That is if you are not bought out first." William grinned. "What the hell are you doing here?" Nathaniel walked beside Paige, gripped her arm. Paige pulled away from his grasp. She grew angry at him but kept her calm. "I came here to finish what I started, unlike other people." She walked around him and quickly up the stairs. He stood for a moment and shook his head in annoyance before turning and following her. "I told you to go home," he said between breaths. He held his sight as he tried to catch up with her on the stairs. Paige reached the top and turned around. She watched him lean half his body on the railing to brace himself. Paige looked away for a moment, then back down at him. "I won't have a home to go to if I don't finish this." She paused for a minute. "Why do you even care? You left, remember?" Nate stood there silent. He didn't know what to tell her. Paige started to walk away, and Nate knew he was wrong for leaving her. Wrong for dragging her along in the first place. "I know, I said things I didn't mean." He spoke up and watched the ground. He was too ashamed to look her in the eyes. He waited for a couple of people to pass before he continued. Paige stood sideways looking down at him while Nathaniel looked up at her. "I left because I don't want you to turn out like me." "You think I don't care?" "I left because I started to care too much." The words fell out his mouth. He finally told her how he felt. Paige didn't know what to say. The shock showed on her face. Her mouth was slightly agape. Clapping echoed behind Paige. She whipped her head around to see Vespa. The vixen stopped clapping and walked over towards Paige. She was followed by 2 bodyguards. Well, the bull grew some balls. How sweet. She snapped her fingers for the guys to grab Paige. The 2 grabbed her arms tight. Paige struggled a bit, but it was no use. Nathaniel flared his nose and he reached for his gun. Oh no, Vespa pointed her finger at him. She wiggled it back and forth. Be a good boy and hand it over now. She opened her hand waiting for him to hand his gun over. He did as he was told. He slowly took it out and handed it to her. That's a good boy. She walked down the couple steps and wrapped her arm around him. She smiled as they walked up the stairs and followed the guards. Nathaniel shook his head. He didn't know what to do now. Paige was practically being dragged down the hall by the 2 men. They stopped in front of William's office as Laura, the secretary, watched them. Vespa smiled at her as the guards opened William's door. They walked Paige in, and Vespa tugged on Nate for him to follow. The guards pulled out 2 chairs as Vespa placed one a couple feet in front of the other one. She pushed Nate down, making him sit in the chair. He grunted in pain and held his side. Vespa smirked, then looked up and watched the guards force Paige to sit in the other chair. Paige gave them all nasty looks as Vespa walked in front of Nate and sat in his lap. She wrapped her arm around his neck and crossed her legs. Nate clenched his teeth trying to keep his cool, while Paige rolled her eyes and shook her head in disgust. Too bad I must kill you, Toro. You were always my favorite. She traced his copper-colored cheek with her index finger. Nate just kept his eyes straight ahead watching the 2 bodyguards. Yeah, and I wish you would have stayed the F. Nate went to curse at her, but she smacked him hard in the back of the head. Language. She scowled at him. He didn't even flinch, his stare fixed on the guards. Vespa noticed him staring at Paige. She looked at Paige, then Nathaniel. You trained her well, I must say. She doesn't look scared at all. Vespa slowly got off his lap. That will soon change. She walked around behind him. She placed her hands on his shoulders and leaned slowly. Her lips pressed lightly to his ear to whisper. Oh, the things we are going to do to her. I promise she will break easy. She nibbled a bit on his ear. Nathaniel's anger bubbled up and he jerked his head away from her. And after we kill her, Vespa stood up straight and looked over to Paige. I'm going to have fun with you, my dear Toro. Nate watched her walk around in front of him. Vespa told one of the guards to go and retrieve William. He nodded and walked out. Vespa turned and watched Nate, still taunting him. Meanwhile, the other guard smirked and checked out Vespa's backside. Paige noticed his gun behind his back. She looked at it, then to Nathaniel. I killed her dear old daddy, so killing sweet little innocent daughter should be easy. Vespa continued to run her mouth. Paige inched closer to the gun. Hearing those words sent her over the edge. Paige grabbed the guard's gun, and as he turned to confront her, she hit him with the butt of the gun. Vespa heard the commotion and went to grab her own gun from her coat. Nate grabbed her wrist before she could completely upholster it. Vespa struggled to get free, but his grip was tight around her wrist. He started to bring the gun up to her stomach. She grunted, trying to stop it, but he was too strong. Oh, come on, baby, she uttered, trying to beg. Keep poking the bull, you're gonna get the horns. He watched her eyes widen. You know, you can't shoot me. You would miss me too much. He pressed the gun to her stomach. You know what your weakness is. You talk too much, Nathaniel said as he pulled the trigger. Vespa's eyes widened, and she gasped for air. She reached for him as she slid down to the floor. Paige watched everything. He killed the person who killed her father. Now all that was left was William. Nate stepped over Vespa's body and walked over to Paige. He grabbed her arm lightly. You okay? He asked. Paige looked at Vespa dead on the floor before looking up at Nathaniel. He was inches away from her face. She could feel his warm breath on her skin. She looked up into his eyes for what seemed like hours. He bent down closer to her but paused when he heard footsteps. Nate pushed her aside and rushed to the door. He stood up against the wall waiting for whatever came through the door. The bodyguard opened the door and entered in front of William. He didn't even notice Nathaniel standing on the side of the door. The guard saw Vespa on the ground and Paige in the middle of the room. He started to rush her, but Nathaniel shot him. William threw his hands in the air as he watched the guard go down. Paige eyed William as he stood there. Nathaniel walked backwards to the door and closed it. "Are you going to kill me?" William asked with a smirk on his face. Nathaniel looked at Paige, but she kept her eyes on William. "Sit," she said, pointing to his desk. Nathaniel kept his gun on him, in case he tried anything stupid. Paige watched William. He didn't move at first. "All right, I'll play your little game." William walked to his desk and sat down. Paige walked to the front of the desk and stared down at him. "Look, if you are going to kill me, kill me. I don't feel like hearing your sob story." William spat out as he looked at Nate and then up at Paige. Paige's eyes widened. She couldn't believe he had just said that. "My sob story? Really?" She paused for a moment. "No, William, I won't give you the satisfaction. Death would be too easy," she said, placing her palms on his desk. She got down to his level. "What do you want then?" he asked her. "I want you to give this up. This is my father's company, not William Green's," but before she could finish, William screamed at her. "No. This is my company. I killed your father with a snap of my fingers, and I can do the same to you and your boy toy here. When you are gone, it will be my company, but for some reason you have a hard time letting it sink in. You are up with the big dogs now, the wolves. You can't handle this, sweetheart. We will tear you apart. My comrades and I over in Russia have big plans. And with Mr. Alvarez on board, we are unstoppable." He rambled on as he slowly slid his hand closer to the edge of the desk. Paige grabbed his letter opener and stabbed William's hand. It went through his flesh and stuck in the desk, as William shrieked in pain. William reached for the letter opener. Paige pulled out her knife and slammed it in the desk. "Touch it and I'll put this in the other hand," she screamed. Nate lowered his gun and walked toward her a bit. He tried not to smile as he walked to the side of her. William looked at her, then Nate, and slowly pulled his hand away. "Wolf, meet Hunter and Hunter's knife. I just skinned you and left you out for the crows." As soon as she finished speaking, Agent Jefferson and fellow FBI agents swarmed in. Nate turned and watched them in shock. Paige lifted her shirt a bit to reveal the wire taped to her stomach. William noticed the wire and began to scream and curse at her. "We got it from here, Ms. Welsh," the agent told her. Mitch came running in. He ran up to her and hugged her. Paige watched the FBI take William away in handcuffs as Mitch held her. Paige broke away and looked at Nathaniel. "When you left, I went to the FBI and told them everything," she explained to Nate. He nodded and smirked a bit. "You see, emotion didn't make me lose focus, it gave me focus." "So, what do we do now?" she asked Nathaniel, breaking away from Mitch. "You have a company to run." Nathaniel turned and walked away. Paige's heart dropped. She reached out and went to follow him, but Mitch grabbed her. "Paige, I can't believe you are alive. I thought you were dead." He handed her the silver necklace. She opened her hand and smiled. "Thank you. I thought I lost this." Nate made his way undetected through the police and people. He walked out of the building and back to his car. He sat down in the seat holding his side. She took care of everything without killing anyone. He smiled at how much she learned, and even taught him a couple things. He started his car and drove off, not knowing what was next for him. A couple weeks later, Russia. The Ukraine boss smiled as he opened the briefcase. "Well, our dear Mr. Green came through." He smiled as he handed the software over to the man sitting at the computer. He uploaded the software as the boss smiled. Suddenly the screen went black and CIA agents and Moscow police swarmed the room. The Ukrainians and Russians held their hands high as the boss cursed. Laura, the secretary, smiled as she walked up to him. "Well, I'm here for my interview." But she looked around at everyone being arrested, It looks like your company will be shut down." Laura smirked as they took him away. The Russian boss cursed and spat at the officers as they escorted him out. Laura was filled with joy knowing her hard undercover work pulled off. The whole time, Laura had worked for the CIA to uncover what William was doing. It was a bust of her career. After William confessed, the CIA teamed up with the Russian government to bring them down. In a matter of minutes, the Russians' whole operation crumbled in front of him, and all he could do was watch from the back of a police car. The CIA, as well as FBI, then went after and arrested Mr. Alvarez. They did not have enough on Marina, so she was left to plan her father's revenge. She called in Kevin to have him replace the 3 devils she lost, so she could be a full power. Marina needed Kevin to get a hold of the other Ukrainians and Russians to join her cause. Chapter 13. JJ's phone rang as he sat in the Friday morning, 6-lane traffic. He hadn't slept after the previous events, but then again with his slight PTSD, he didn't sleep much. Sean and all the bad events gave him nightmares. He finally wiggled it out his jean pocket and answered it. "Simino, I have a bit of good news to tell you. Mr. Alvarez was arrested and Marina is caving under the pressure. She is sending me to Russia to get with the imprisoned leader to make sure they are still in business, as well as recruit a few of them into the devils." JJ kept his hands on the wheel. "I thought we only had 7 in the devils," he asked. "We do. Derek and Vespa were killed by Nate, so we are down 3. I need you to track down and hold Nate for me." In the grumpy foul mood JJ was already in, he snapped. "What the hell, Kevin? What does it have to do with taking down the cartel? You keep playing around with these people and nothing is getting done. Yeah, her dad is in jail, but instead of bringing her and the others down, you play around with her," he screamed. He had spent the past month tracking down gangbangers for the cartel, and enough was enough. He was tired of being Kevin's puppet. "Simino, I know, but I don't have that much on Marina in connection with these rebels and her father. I need a little bit more." Kevin tried to coax JJ. JJ was pissed, and, in this moment, he realized Kevin was not going to stay true to his word. The congressman's brother along with Mr. Alvarez is in jail. "We just have a few more people to get and your brother's justice will be served, I promise," Kevin continued with his silver tongue. "You could swear he was Lucifer instead of Marina. Just go and find Nathaniel Steele," Kevin demanded now. "Yeah." JJ hung up on Kevin and tossed his phone. The Cajun was going to find Nate all right, and he was going to make him help. He knew the wrathful bull had nothing left to lose, nor would pass up the opportunity to get himself out of whatever mess he was in. JJ's jacked-up Ford screeched on the overpass as he sped towards his destination. It was going to take time to find the soldier. Nathaniel was a highly trained individual and great at staying off the radar, but the Cajun was determined. 5 years was long enough. He played their games, but it was now time to cut the strings with Kevin and do what he should have done all along, and that was to take on the cartel his way. Most of the devils and cartel's business partners were out the way, and with Nathaniel's help, he was sure to succeed in taking down Marina. Meanwhile, Paige graduated college top of her class, and set up many scholarships helping others in need. She then took over the company along with the help of Mitch. It was hard for Paige at first, but she had many helping hands. Paige brought Welsh Incorporated to new heights, and the company blossomed. Green's company was taken over by Paige as well. They merged, and she fixed the corruption inside it, not only saving the many employees' jobs, but creating new ones, just as her father would have done. Paige missed Nathaniel. She had fallen hard for him and still couldn't believe he walked out on her a second time. Paige knew she couldn't dwell on it. She had responsibilities and duties to fulfill. Paige kept up with much of what Nathaniel taught her. Every evening going to the gym and every weekend to the range. Paige would also go to the same cafe where the two had met, sitting at the same table every time, hoping, deep down, he would come busting through the doors and sweep her off her feet. Paige laughed behind her cup of coffee. She knew he wasn't the Prince Charming she wanted. Nathaniel would never have done that. Paige asked for the check as she watched the people pass by outside of the window. The warmth and feeling of accomplishment flushed over her. At last everything was over and she could finally breathe. Not many people have been in her situation and lived, but she stepped up and survived. Paige had blossomed into a mature woman because of the events that had unfolded. She didn't allow the death of her father or the wicked schemes of William break her. Paige's faith and prayers had helped her, and the Lord had sent Nathaniel into her life to aid as well. Nothing was ever by chance, it was all set up in the correct order and fulfillment, a divine intervention. The waiter brought the blonde's check and she paid her bill. She had recently changed it back to her natural color. The brown was too much of a reminder of the hard times. Paige waited a minute longer, then got up and walked out. She pushed the heavy door open and walked to her car. The driver hopped out and opened the door. Paige stared at the inside for a moment, remembering the last time she walked out this cafe and sat in that seat. Her life was thrown upside down. Paige then shook her head and waved off the driver. "I think I'll walk." She smiled at him. "Ms. Welsh, are you sure?" "I'll go park the car and walk with you," he told her. No, I'll be fine." She smiled and walked away down the street. The driver nodded and closed the door. Paige shoved her hands in her knee-length jacket. The cold winter wind whipped up, blowing her blonde strands around. As she rounded the corner, she had a feeling that someone was following her. Paige didn't freak out. She remembered her training and slowed down, waiting for the person to catch up. Paige took the next alley quickly and waited for the person to join her. She pressed her body against the cold brick as she reached in her pocket, taking out her knife. Paige gripped the handle tightly in her hands, waiting for the stranger to follow her. Paige could see her breath in front of her. As she waited for the stranger, he finally walked down the alley, and she grabbed his brown leather jacket. She slammed the man against the wall with the knife at his throat. "What do you want?" she demanded. The large stranger smirked as he pulled his hoodie off. Paige gasped when she saw who it was. "Nathaniel," she whispered, but still had the knife to his throat in disbelief. Instead of a warm welcome, her face stated a frown. "What are you doing here? I thought you left." Nathaniel looked down at her and the knife at his throat. He went to push her away, but she slammed him back against the wall. "I never left. I've been watching you this whole time," he told her. Paige couldn't believe it. His eyes wandered to the knife at his throat. Paige slowly lowered it. Her emotions were a big ball of distress. Part of her wanted so much to jump in his arms, while the other half wanted to stab him. Preferably in an area that would do a world of pain. The gall he had showing up after all this time. Watching her or not, he should have been by her side, but instead he took off after the FBI arrested William. She could never figure out why. He wasn't going to jail. Paige made a deal with Agent Jefferson to ensure that. Paige thought the two had grown close, but his nickname was fitting. He was a stubborn, hard-headed bull. He thought he knew everything, and his way was the correct way. Paige might have had played along with that in the past, but now she had grown stronger and wasn't having none of it. He leaned down closer to her, inches away from her lips. Paige stood there for a moment, but then backed away. How dare he even try to kiss her? Paige was in such a foul mood she needed to leave before she said or did something she would regret. "Well, I don't need you anymore." She put her knife away and walked off. Nathaniel smiled and shook his head. He walked out on the street and watched her walk away. Paige stopped and turned her head slightly to see him staring. Without a word she turned again and walked to the other side of the street. She lowered her head and continued to walk back to her office. "Mexico, are you kidding me?" Marina growled as she slapped the newspaper down in front of Kevin. The headline read, "Businessman arrested due to Russian and cartel ties." "I had no choice, Marina. They had too much on William Green, and your father was at that meeting when they arrested him. Not long after they brought him in. I couldn't do anything about it." Kevin looked over the paper, then watched Marina pace in front of the pool. her heels clicking on the concrete as she held the bridge of her nose. A meeting that you arranged, you and your CIA people. Promises of a partnership and to help back us. And Nate, I see he ended up helping that Welsh girl. I need those companies, Kevin. William washed our money and he promised to get the software and weapons to the Ukraine Russians. That software was going to open that building to the weapons warehouse. Derek was supposed to help him and so was Vespa. They were supposed to have this all under control. Marina finally sat down beside him. I need you to try and get Mikhailov out of jail and then back on our side. I also need his brother to kill and replace Nate in the Seven Devils. I need my devils now more than ever. With or without CIA help, my father should have never trusted them. Marina drummed her fingers on the table a bit. You know Vespa and Derek were killed by Nate, right? Kevin hated to add that bit of news in on top of everything else. Kevin was for himself. Neither for the CIA or the cartel. Whichever group benefited him more is the one he would side with, and currently the cartel was a better choice. Marina cursed in Spanish a bit and looked over at Kevin. I will call that rich boy who was asking to join a while back. Hush, or whatever he calls himself. I will send him after that girl I sent JJ to take care of that situation with the missing money, as well as those gangbangers. Maybe he can locate Nate for us. Marina thought out loud. I need you to handle this rebel group as well as this business situation. This girl and Nate will be a problem. They need to go. Is our key player in the Welsh company still on board with us? Marina asked, and Kevin gave her a slight nod. Yes, he will take over the Welshes and Green's company and merge the two. He will also still allow us to do business with him. Money, weapons, it is all covered. I will handle this. You just worry about this side of the border. Kevin stood up and buttoned his coat before walking off. Chapter 14, Dallas, Texas. Nate walked cautiously into the crowded nightclub. The smell of booze and sweat filled the air as laser lights and glow stick lit the dance floor. The music vibrated the air and floor as he walked down into the middle of the building. The dance floor had thousands of sweaty bodies dancing together, grinding, and laughing without a care in the world. Young men and women packed in the small warehouse having a good time, while the DJ dropped beats from his podium. Nate carved his way through the crowd, pushing people out his way. The soldier needed to get to the other side of the warehouse-type building. Nate hated being in these crowds, but he was there obtaining information. As he passed, one girl tried to dance on him. The bull stopped and gave her a look of disgust. He raised his brow and he pushed her off. The girl was so drunk she fell backwards, flinging her solo cup all over the place. Nate could hear other people scream at the girl's clumsiness. Nate couldn't even understand what people got out of getting wasted and hanging out with sweaty strangers. A good time for him would be a quiet evening cleaning his guns. Nate stopped and seen his target up ahead. The man was on the thin side of Mexican descent. His black hair was a bit on the long side, and he kept pushing it back out his face. The look of him, Nate could tell he was one of those womanizers who thought they were God's gift to women. The girl on the floor by Nate started laughing at him. He looked down at her and shook his head as he walked off. The young man laughed with the bouncer as he walked towards the exit door. Combing back his hair out his face while checking out a couple of girls as they passed, the bouncer shook his head and walked to the bar, leaving the young man unattended. The cool cat smirked as he went to walk out the back for a smoke. Before closing the door, the male noticed Nate in the crowd. He cursed to himself as he closed the door behind him quickly. The young man stepped to the side of the door and reached in his jacket. Pulling out his Beretta, the man loaded it as he was waiting for Nate by the door. His nerves got the best of him as he started to sweat and bounce up and down. Nate reached the exit door quickly. The soldier glanced to the bar to make sure the bouncer was busy and would not intervene. Now was his chance to go after the creep and beat the info out of him. Nate turned the handle, slowly walking outside. He held the door as he stepped out into the humid night air. The alleyway between the two buildings was rather large with one light lit. The orange glow lit the garbage bin and part of the alleyway, the rest was pitch black. Nate looked around, taking in the surroundings. Suddenly the man raised his gun to Nate's back. Nate stopped for a minute with his hands raised. "That's right, mother, you." But before he could finish his sentence, Nate grabbed the man's arm. The two began to wrestle a bit for control of the gun. The young man got the upper hand and started to raise the gun up to Nate's face. Nate struggled as he reached and flipped the safety off on the gun. The man tried to fire, but the gun was useless. Nate elbowed the man in the face and tripped him with his leg with one fluid motion. As the young man fell, Nate grabbed the gun from his hands. The young man hit the ground with a thud and hollered in pain. He crawled to the other side of the alleyway, crying and pleading for his life. The sound of his scraping body and his pleas aggravated Nate. Nate took the safety off and held the gun straight. Nate followed slowly as the young man scooted on his butt across the alleyway. He finally hit the wall and turned his head to look at the bricks, nowhere else left to crawl. The man looked up at Nate, whining, his pitiful face running with blood and tears. "Please, don't," he said, sobbing, looking up at Nate. Nate pointed the gun at him and watched as the man closed his eyes, calling for his mom and other things in Spanish. "Marina must be desperate hiring you to come after me." Nate shook his head at the crying man before him, his hands covering his face like that was going to stop a bullet. Nate held the gun out, close to the man's head. The metal was sweating in his hand as he steadied it. His finger inched closer to the trigger, squeezing it a bit. This was nothing new for Nate. Killing was his job. He was so used to this action. He grew a bit cold-hearted and withdrawn from humanity. "So, tell me, what is the old boss up to?" Nate asked. "I am not telling you nothing. I'd rather die than face her." The male spit blood on the ground by Nate's boots. Her soldiers were well trained and loyal. He should have known he wasn't going to get anything out of him. Nate's finger started to squeeze, but before Nate could squeeze the trigger all the way, there was an explosion. Fire licked the air, and the flying debris knocked the young man unconscious. The blast sent Nate flying against the wall. Nate made impact with the bricks and fell backwards. He slowly turned over on his stomach, blinking, and tried to catch his breath. Nathaniel's ears were ringing loudly, causing everything to go silent. The smoke and ash filled the air, causing his vision to blur out. From the fire, he could only make out a tall, thin figure walking towards him. Blinking a couple times to get the blood out of his eyes, Nate observed the figure walking towards him and stopped. All Nate could see was the man's big black boots. His heart raced as he tried to find his gun. Coughing as the smoke filled his lungs, Nate watched the man bend down to look at him. The male's face hidden with a gas mask, but Nate could hear the man talking. He couldn't make out what he was saying from the ringing in his ears, but he could tell the man was definitely saying, or singing something. Suddenly the man's manic laugh filled mixed with the ringing. The man rose to his feet and walked away. Nate could barely move. Suddenly, Nate felt his body jolt as it slid across the concrete. As the man dragged him, Nate watched the warehouse burn. As people went running and screaming out of the building, no one paid any mind to the fact that Nathaniel was being dragged away. The man with the gas mask had the soldier by his pant leg. The bull knew this was a professional. This man created this distraction to catch and or kill Nate. Whoever he was, this man was very clever and experienced. He was able to surprise Nate and catch him, something that almost never happened. The soldier always made sure to cover himself to avoid situations like this. However, he could not have prepared for a bomb going off. Whoever this was, they were also a lunatic. The last thing Nate saw before he passed out was the tires of a van. Nate sat tied to a chair as his eyes slowly opened. The pain from the concussion flooded his head. The soldier could also feel a few bruises and possibly a broken bone or two. Nathaniel could feel the dried blood and dirt all over him. Nate tried to move his hands, but they were tightly bound by wire. "Ah, look who finally woke up." "May Shaw Shaw." The voice came from behind him. Nate slowly lifted his head and squinted to look for who was talking. The Cajun accent gave away who it was. It was the same man who blew up the club and took Nate, but this time he didn't wear a gas mask. His face was covered in black soot, except for around his eyes where his goggles, which was now on the top of his head, had been. The man bent down and looked at Nate in the face. JJ. Nate shook his head in disappointment. Jonathan freaking Simino, Nate said again, looking at the ground. Well, happy to see you too, JJ said, standing up straight. The tied-up Nathaniel sat impatiently, glaring at JJ as he did so. What is this? A joke? Nate asked, raising a brow, looking up at him. With his wrists bound behind his back, Nathaniel still showed no fear towards the Cajun. Nathaniel was almost relaxed, along with being highly ticked off. He could have broken that chair, along with JJ's nose, but he wanted to see where this went. No, Shaw, you have a big bounty on your head. His Cajun accent thick towards the end. JJ ran his hand through his dirty black hair, making it more of a mess. JJ wanted to make sure Nate was against Marina or not. Nate just shook his head, watching him. What? What? JJ asked. Of all people, Nate said. What is that supposed to mean? JJ asked, crossing his arms over his chest. The Cajun had on a mechanic jumpsuit, but the arms were tied around his waist, revealing his black muscle shirt. You're an idiot, that's what. Nate laughed a bit sarcastically. Well, not too big of a Korean, if I caught the great bull. He snapped back. A couple of minutes passed in silence as they stared at each other. JJ did not have any intention on killing Nate at all. He knew Nate was in deep with the cartel, and this was a good thing for the Cajun. If he could only tell Nate of his and Kevin's plan to bring down the cartel, Nate would be a great and powerful player on their side, but he had to make sure Nate was desperate. Johnny, what are you doing all the way out here anyways? Aren't you mostly in the Bayou country? Nate asked with a sigh as he looked him up and down. Nate wasn't afraid of him one bit. Johnny was a joke to him, and he could never figure out why the crazy Kunis would come after him. Remember that favor you owe me? From when I saved your butt. Johnny turned and walked back to a table that he had a bunch of his equipment on. Nate just watched him for a couple more moments before he looked around the room. What about it? Nate asked. JJ turned and gave Nate a big smile. I need to know if I can cash that in. JJ asked, hoping he would agree. JJ liked Nate, he was a good man, and JJ knew that. The bull was only trying to survive is all. Heck, JJ got caught in the web of the cartel and its ugly ways, trying to take down his brother's killer, so the Cajun could relate. The two were good men, just stuck in a crappy situation with the intent on surviving. When Nate decided to help that businessman's daughter instead of killing her, JJ knew he would most likely help him, even if he didn't want to. Nate sighed and nodded. Let me hear it. Nate agreed to hear JJ's favor. The Cajun proceeded to tell the soldier his tale of how he came to the cartel. It was a long story, and JJ could see Nathaniel getting aggravated with how long JJ took. Cajuns tended to do that, as well as throw in sound effects to the story. So, why did you help her? JJ finally asked. Most of this information JJ already knew, but what JJ wanted to know is why suddenly Nate grew a conscience. You knew this girl was wanted by the cartel and this William guy who worked for them, so why help her? Why risk yourself? Why do a complete U-turn on the Nate I know and help this Paige? JJ walked towards Nate. Nate was still staring at the floor. He didn't answer because he never really thought about it till now. I'm tired, Simino. I'm tired of innocent people being hurt. Yes, I am guilty of doing much of the hurting, but I am fed up with it. This girl did not deserve any of this, and she was just the straw that broke the camel's back, so to say. JJ was amazed. This was the most Nate had ever said to him. So, you could say, me and you are not that different? JJ asked, comparing the two stories. No, well, you were a little crazier, a lot crazier. But yes, we are similar in a way. You got into this mess wanting to get justice for your brother, and I had it out for the country and the people who used me in the military, but I realized it is just not worth it. This business, this cartel, is a virus. Yeah, the ones working for them, or those other gangsters and creeps deserved it. Less bad guys in the street, I say, but the innocent people caught in the crossfire. Nate trailed off, looking away from JJ. I understand, that is why I want you to help me. Help me take down Marina and what is left of the cartel. Kevin promised me, but I just realized that bastard only cares for himself. I was just a pawn in his game to stay afloat with the CIA as well as the cartel. So, I'm asking you to help me out. Let us end this so-said virus. Let us be the remedy, JJ said in a joking manner as he chuckled a bit. Nate glared at him, shaking his head. Stop being a jackass and I will help you. I mean, what choice do I have? Nate looked down at the chair, then at the Cajun. Should have been a cowboy. JJ sighed out loud to himself as he walked to untie Nathaniel. What the heck are you talking about? I swear the things that come out of your mouth makes me wonder sometimes. Nate shook his head. It's a song. I listen to music a lot, helps me with some of my problems. There is a method to my madness. JJ spoke as he began to untie him. I don't think music can help with all your problems, JJ. Nate blurted out. JJ stopped mid-untying. Do you want to stay in this chair? He asked with a hint of anger. Nate kept his mouth shut, but let out an annoyed grumble in his throat. JJ finally united the bull and dropped the rope places less bone temps Rowler. The two needed to conjure up a plan together. They had to not only take Marina out, but that no good Kevin as well. JJ was to take Nate to Kevin, and then at the appointed time, the two would surprise him with a bullet. Kevin would be the easiest since he was in the States, and not surrounded by an army or soldiers like Marina. JJ sent a text message to Kevin letting him know he had Nathaniel. Kevin in return, let JJ know where to bring the bull. Now JJ, this must work smoothly, no idiot stuff. Nathaniel spoke as he looked for the building plans on where Kevin stated to bring him. He can't know we are on to him and we are together on this. Nate continued. I'm not an idiot, Nate. You know I can get serious when I have to. I was a cop, for God's sake. JJ rolled his eyes as he began to load up his things into his truck. What about your girl? JJ asked about Paige. The way Nate perked up when he mentioned Paige, JJ knew he had a thing for her. She needs to stay out of it. The less she is involved, the better. Enough has gone on in her life, she doesn't need this as well. Nate kept his eyes on the phone screen. You're not even going to message her to tell her you're okay, or nothing? JJ asked. Nate just glanced up at the Cajun with a glare. Just drop it, JJ. Leave her out of it. But she kind of is in it. I mean, Marina is going to go after her too. You know that, right? Especially if you betray the devil for Paige. JJ was right, and Nate knew it. JJ, I know, okay. Paige is safe in her business surrounded by guards at the moment. She is better off not being around me. People around me tend to get hurt, so just drop it. My brother wasn't around me, and for that he was killed. Keep those you love close, Nate. Only you can protect her. JJ added in as he hopped in his truck. It hit a nerve with Nate, but now was not the time. They needed to take out Kevin first, then they could come up with a better plan to get Marina. Welch Incorporated. Paige sat at her desk with the small TV turned on in her office. The noise of the news station filled the large room, making it bearable to work in. She hated the silence and solitude. It reminded her of how much she was alone. An older gentleman knocked on her door, startling her out of her daydream. Paige looked away from the TV and towards the mail. Staying late again? He asked her. Yes, Mitch was her father's closest friend and now Paige's mentor. He had been a huge help with getting her company back on track, as well as helping her learn the ropes. I'm almost done. I just wanted to go over everything one last time before we send the finals into production. Paige smiled as she brushed a strand of hair out of her face. All right, I'm heading out. Are you okay by yourself? He asked her. He didn't want to leave her, but he knew Paige was set in her ways. Mitch, she said with a laugh in her voice. I'll be fine. I'm almost finished. Go. Go home, old man. Paige joked, shaking her head at him. He let out a slight chuckle before waving to her as he exited her office. Paige was used to being alone. She hated it, but there was nothing she could do about it. It had been almost 6 months since she had seen Nathaniel. Now he was just a distant memory. There were more important things on her mind, like running a company. It was a new experience for her. It was a struggle day to day, and she had better things to worry about than the girlish fantasy of Nate coming in on his white horse to rescue her again. A stupid one at that. Nate would never ride a horse, more like a tank, and he wasn't exactly Prince Charming. He was more like Jerk G.I. Joe. Paige was different now. She didn't need a man to rescue her, and she didn't consider Nate rescuing her, more like aiding her in her problem. Paige could fight for herself, and that is exactly what she did. Every time a board member would complain or make a wise-ass comment, she would snap back. Paige hated to admit it, but if it wasn't for that tragedy, she would have never become stronger. It had made her more independent, and it opened her eyes to her potential that she never knew she had before. Paige waited for Mitch to leave before she dropped her smile to a frown. Paige didn't quite know why, but that story on the news had her worried. She knew something was wrong as the reporter talked about the nightclub explosion. Something in her gut told her it was either Marina or something to do with Nate. Now that she knew about the underbelly and the criminal organization, she didn't put past anything being impossible for them. Paige knew if she was in danger, Agent Jefferson would give her a call. The FBI was still on the case as it was still ongoing. The rabbit hole was deep, and Jefferson was following the white rabbit. He often called Paige to let her know what he had found out, or how the investigation was going. Paige knew he was going to make sure William and everyone affiliated with that cartel would be in jail for a long time. Chapter 15. Russia. Mikhailov sat pitifully in the dark jail cell listening to the other prisoners arguing amongst themselves. "Shut up." He yelled for silence, but his words were unheard. The prisoners yelled louder. "You have no power here, Mick." He heard the faint screams of a prisoner. Mikhailov didn't yell back because he knew it was true. Mick reflected on everything that led him up to this. He was a leader of the terrorist group after his father passed and oversaw taking over his country. William Green was supposed to supply software and guns to help him do just that, but the CIA and FBI caught on and swooped in with the Russian government. They took him down with most of his people. The cartel was supposed to help in the matter, but it seems they forgot their arrangements. He knew his father should have never gotten involved with them people. He knew the CIA and the cartel together was a horrible mistake, and now he was paying for it. Mikhailov sat leaned back on his cot and pouted. He failed his father and his father's formed rebel group. Mikhailov could hear the prisoner quiet down. Faint tapping of shoes were coming closer. Mikhailov sat up and looked at the shadowy figures that stood by his cell. "Come with us," an American man said. Mikhailov did as commanded. The men dressed in military uniforms led him to a room, way back in the prison. The room was small, just a desk and a few chairs, but it wasn't empty. In that room sat a middle-aged gentleman. The man that sat at the steel table had short black hair and was clean-shaven. He was in his mid-40s, and wore a black suit and tie. The man motioned for Mick to sit and he did. "Do you know why you are here?" he asked. Mick tilted his head and wondered why he was asking him such a dumb question. "Are you serious?" Mick asked. "What do you want from me?" he asked as the man cleared his throat. "I'm the one asking questions. You answer them. Now, do you know why you are here?" he asked in a normal but firm tone. Mick knew it would be in his best interest to follow along, so he nodded. "I was a leader in a rebel group trying to overrun Russia's capital with stolen software and weapons." He spoke slowly. The man nodded. No, I don't think that is correct. You are here because you failed. You failed. You had the software, you had the weapons as well as the cartel's backing and men at your side, and you failed. You got caught. And like the loser you are, you just gave up." The man snickered as Mick grew angry. "Who do you think you are? American scum. You put me here." He cursed more in Russian and then spit on the floor. "My name is Kevin O'Neill." CIA, part of the Devils, and the man who knew you could not handle the job of taking over Russia. Kevin stared down Mick. You had potential, yes, but you lacked the balls to follow through, unlike your father. Pity he finally succumbed to his radiation poisoning. Kevin paused. Did you even know the power of that software you had? No one can just overthrow a whole government, especially a little rebel group as yourself. Yes, the cartel does business with you because you distribute their drugs throughout the country. Yes, they also aided in getting you into contact with William to help with your money, as well as selling you guns from Welsh Incorporated, but you still failed. All this help and resources and you got caught? He asked. Mick shifted, because he really didn't. Mr. Green only promised it to help him greatly. You know the world is run on death and destruction. The war pigs of the new age turn to technology to follow through their evil plots, but when it comes down to it, people, money, and guns win wars. Kevin rambled on. If you only knew the opportunity you had, you could have taken over the world with that disc, those weapons, the backing you had, and yet you sit here. That software, well, the real one, not the fake we slip you. The real enchilada was a software program that could wireless access any security system. Any nuclear device on Earth, including reactor cores, without having to bypass security software. Any computer database without hiring 10 hackers to do it. It could also allow you into the warehouse where the weapons were stored, and I'm talking major weapons here. It also could help the users slip any security pass on the world, and do as they please. You see, our dear John Welsh wanted that software destroyed, and we could not very well have that happen. He smiled at the Russian. So why are you here? To rub this in my face. He grumbled. Yes and no. I need you to give me the whereabouts of your brother Nikolai Borakov. I am in much need of his talents, you can say. I also need to make sure your group will still continue to do business with the cartel. Why? Why him? The man asked the agent. Well, let's say we don't have the software either, and the one person who can find it, will have obstacles. The one obstacle is already on to us, and I want him taken out. Marina Alvarez, Mr. Alvarez's daughter, wants your brother to join the Devils, so that we may continue our alliance. I need your brother to take out the gunman, the bull. I have heard of my other devil JJ capturing him, but Marina wants Nick to join us, and in doing so take out Nate. Marina is very hard up on taking Nathaniel out. She blames him for getting her father caught and in jail. I will handle the companies. I have an inside man on it. But I need Nate out of the way. Kevin spoke in a low tone, almost if he was talking to himself, not giving the man in front of him any mind. If I help you, find my brother, that is, can you get me out of here? Mikhailov looked down at his shackles, then to the dark-haired man. The agent took a long sigh, then nodded. I can see what I can do. Kevin slowly reached into his jacket pocket and placed a cell phone on the metal table. He then slowly slides the phone over to the chained man. Make the call, then we talk. Mikhailov slowly reached for the phone. If you get me out of here, I guarantee business with the cartel will remain our priority. Mikhailov dialed the number. Kevin gave a wicked grin as he watched Mikhailov contact his brother. Texas. Paige sighed as she lay awake in her king-size bed, watching the ceiling fan slowly rotate. It was early morning, and the sun peeked through her closed curtains, lighting the room a bit. She turned over and checked the time on her bedside clock. The clock read 8:30, and Paige knew she needed to get up. The blonde had a meeting that afternoon at one of her company's buildings. Always some sort of business going on in her life. Running a company was not easy, and she often wished for advice from her father. Paige knew John Welsh would have been proud of what his daughter accomplished, if he were still alive. The loss of him would forever weigh heavy on her heart, but with a lot of prayer, she made it through each day. Paige slowly sat up and pulled back the warm covers, dreading to touch the cold wooden floor. Her feet sat and dangled off the bed, but before she could stand up, her phone rang. She reached over, pulled it off the charger and slid the screen over to answer it. She was too tired to even look to see who was calling. Hello? She asked, clearing the phlegm from her throat. Hello? she said more clearly. Yes, Ms. Welsh, this is Jamal Rogers. I'm a friend of Nathaniel. Nathaniel Steele. Paige was surprised by the person who was calling her. Why was a friend of Nate calling her phone? She asked herself. The deep voice said hello again, thinking she had hung up. I'm here. She shook her head and stood up. I need to speak with you, but not over the phone. Can you meet me somewhere? He asked her. She stared at the wall, blinking. She didn't know if she could trust this person, nor should she get involved with anything that had to deal with Nate. Heck, she hadn't even seen Nathaniel for months now. No word, nothing, and to be honest, if she saw him again, she would give him a chewing out and even a black eye. Look, I know you and Nate didn't leave on the best of terms, but he made me swear that if anything happened to contact you. Jamal paused again. Meet me at my office. Paige went to give him the details, but he stopped her. No, it has to be somewhere open, where I know nothing is bugged. Meet me at the cafe down from your office building, say in 40 minutes. Jamal then hung up, leaving Paige at the other end, still wondering what just happened. Tossing it on her comforter, Paige rose from her bed and walked to the bathroom to get ready. The irony was just too great. Paige sat in the same cafe, down to the exact same table she had met Nathaniel. The only difference this time was the fact she was less nervous than the last time. The past events made this once timid girl into a strong young woman. Instead of watching the tablecloth like before, her training told her to look at the people, the surroundings, the exits. Even though she wasn't with the bull anymore, he had rubbed off on her. The blonde's focus settled on the door as the waiter led someone to her table. He stepped aside to reveal a large, dark-skinned man. He was wearing sunglasses inside, much like Nate did, but he had a reason. Paige looked down at the walking stick in his hand and realized he was blind. The waiter went to move the seat for Jamal, but he waved him off. Jamal took a seat across from Paige and removed his fedora hat. Paige sat silently and watched Jamal sit the hat to the side to reveal a bald, shiny head. He adjusted himself and put his stick on the side of his chair before speaking. Ms. Welsh. He spoke. Yes, and you are Mr. Rogers, I presume? Paige questioned, and Jamal nodded to confirm. Yes, ma'am, but you can call me Jamal. He cleared his throat and began to speak. Now, the reason I called was because of Nate. I haven't heard from him in 3 weeks. He told me if ever he didn't contact me for a while, to warn you. Jamal took a slow, deep breath. Warn me? Warn me about what? Paige asked, tilting her head, watching the light dance in his sunglasses. You see, Ms. Welsh, Nate had stumbled onto something. Even though he knew you wanted nothing to do with him anymore, he still kept tabs on you, on the whole business side as well. He heard through the grapevine that the people who were after the software of your fathers were still in pursuit, that the cartel were going to be coming for him as well as you. He paused when he heard the waiter walk over and bring water. The waiter asked Paige if she needed anything. Paige smiled up and told him not now. She then turned her focus on Jamal. What are you talking about? Nathaniel took off after William's arrest. He left me. It wasn't a matter of me wanting nothing to do with him. It was a matter of him just vanishing. Paige wanted to correct that statement before continuing. The FBI as well as the local police were looking into the cartel involvement. Paige paused, not wanting to explain everything. Who are you to Nate? Paige wanted to know exactly who this Jamal was, and why suddenly Nate cared about reaching out to her. I was in the Navy SEALs with Steele, well before all this. Jamal took his glasses off to show her the scared eyes and tissue surrounding them. He then put the glasses back on. It was an accident. We were on a mission and it went sideways. Nate saved my life, and ever since then we have been close. Even when I was discharged from the military, but all things aside, Ms. Welsh, you could be in danger, or worse, Nate could be dead. You see, what you didn't know about your father's death, Vespa, she wasn't only hired by William Green or Marina, but also by the CIA. The same CIA agent that worked with you in setting up the Russians. Kevin, he was one of the devils with Nate and Marina's group. The CIA is involved with the cartel and Russians as well as William Green. What Nate found out was there was a software the CIA was trying to get a hold of. The plan was to try and find out where the software was, the true disk, not the fake. He stopped and took a large sip of water. So, you are telling me that the CIA is behind all this? That they want this so-called software? She asked, a bit shocked at the whole thing. Jamal shook his head and sat the glass back down. Sort of. The CIA and Mexican cartel are working together. You see, the disk that is at your business building is a fake also. Mr. Welsh was no idiot. He knew that software was dangerous, and he wanted it and everything dealing with it destroyed. The CIA caught wind of it, and the rogue agent, they sent Vespa to retrieve the disk and take your father out. The software was to aid the Ukrainian-Russian rebels in the cartel's business. Weapons and security mostly. With them taking over, the CIA could control the group in the country. Paige tried to take all this information in. It was so much it almost gave her a headache trying to keep up. Also, rumors that the CIA wanted to control and try and manage the drug trade, as well as get a firm grip in setting up a criminal organization that could be controlled. Jamal added in. How did Nate find out all this? She asked. You should know Nate, he is a stubborn son of a bee. Jamal caught himself before he cursed. He knew that something was up. His involvement in that devil group gave him a bit of insight. He also knew that if he helped you, they would find out and send people after him and then after you. Which you knew some of already. You just didn't know the depth of this, and Nate told me everything in case the worst should happen. Ms. Welsh, he wanted to make sure I warned you. Warn you to know that you have a traitor at your company as well. The last person he was looking into to put the pieces together. After he would find out that information, Nathaniel was going to reveal that truth to Agent Jefferson, the FBI agent on your case. Paige looked off in the distance, thinking back on that day in the office. The day when Vespa had her and Nate in William's office, about to be killed. The fear she felt that day, she swore to herself she would not allow herself to feel that again. Paige took a deep breath and glanced back towards Jamal. Paige knew she needed to find Nate and help him. The blonde also knew she needed to find this software and destroy it before anyone else got hurt. Where was Nathaniel when you last spoke to him? Paige was going to find that bull and help him, but only because he aided her, and was still trying to help bring justice to her father. She had to swallow her pride and emotions and get into the game. Paige could no longer sit back and act like nothing happened. This was her mess as much as it was Nathaniel's. Her father had always taught her to stand and deliver. To never back down and finish the job. Jamal gave her the information she needed on a piece of paper. Good luck, Ms. Welsh. I pray you find Nate. He then stood up, grabbed his hat and cane, and walked off. When Paige arrived home, the sun had already set. The meetings and other Welsh Incorporated business would have to be set on the back burner. This was more important. It not only involved her and Nate, but the company and even the world. Paige had spent most of the day talking to Jamal, and the other half wondering what in the heck she was going to do, and how exactly she was going to stop a whole entire criminal organization. Her first thought was to call the agents already on her case, but Paige wasn't sure if they could be trusted. Agent Jefferson was a great agent and had always been upfront with her, but with all these government's hands in the game, right now she didn't know who to trust except Nathaniel. He was the only one she put her faith in. Paige unlocked the door and tossed the keys on the bar. The keys clanked and slid on the marble a bit, stirring up the silence. She then took off her heels and dropped them on the floor as she made her way into the kitchen. The house was pitch black and nothing could be seen except the oven light. As Paige walked towards the kitchen, a shadow passed behind her quickly. Paige didn't notice the movement. Her mind was still playing over the conversation she had with Jamal. She walked to the fridge and opened it slowly. Paige bent down and reached in, grabbing the half-gallon of chocolate milk. She unscrewed the cap and took a long sip. Letting it rest by her stomach for a moment, she closed her eyes. Paige needed to calm the storm of thoughts, questions, and feelings that swirled around in her mind. Before Paige could take another sip of the milk, black leather gloves came out of the darkness. The fingers grabbed her around the mouth and throat, trying to choke her. The milk dropped from her hands and splattered on the floor. A tall man pulled the struggling Paige towards his body and whispered in her ear, "Hush, hush." Paige's eyes went wild. She quickly remembered her training and stomped on his foot hard. The intruder let out a scream and stumbled back a little. She quickly turned on the light looking for her gun, but it was gone. Paige then looked up at the man as he rushed towards her again. From his look, Paige could tell he was a professional. His tailored suit and well-trimmed hair gave it away. He was no street thug, nor some random robber. The male was too attractive to be a hitman. Most of the ones Paige ran into were rough-looking, but this one looked like a pretty playboy. He was arrogant, and unlike Nathaniel, this one acted as if this job was a game. He smirked and jumped a bit forward to taunt her. "Now look what you have done, spilled milk all over the place, such a waste." He smiled, licking his lips a bit, watching her. Paige snapped out of her daze and began to look frantically for a weapon. "Oh. If you were looking for your gun, I took it. You see, I have been here waiting for you, my dear. Waiting a very long time." The assassin ran his hand through his hair, fixing the few strands that were tossed out of place. Paige stopped searching and watched him walk closer towards her. She knew she couldn't outrun him or escape. Standing up straight, Paige tried to calm herself to think. "Marina sends her regards in the form of me." "Hush, he did a stupid beau. You're here to put on a show or something." Paige sneered at the theatrics and sassed him, another thing she learned from Nathaniel. "No, my dear, I am the new devil who will be taking care of you tonight. No Nathaniel to save you this time." He spoke with a proper accent and a huge grin. "I don't need saving." She spoke harshly. "Hush." The assassin removed a long wire from his suit pocket and wrapped it around his hands. Each turn made the wire stretch out more. Paige backed up until she was against the wall, her hands wandering for a weapon as her eyes stayed fixed on the man. The ridiculously named hitman stepped close slowly. "Lucifer sent me to drag you back to hell, dead or alive." Hush then bolted at Paige with the wire in front of him, going for her neck. Paige quickly reached over and grabbed a large spoon out of the jar on the counter. As he got closer, she forced the spoon into the wire and twisted it around. The wire wrapped around the spoon, making it useless to him and almost trapping him. She then turned, placing her back into his stomach, and put his arms over her shoulder, holding him. Paige then elbowed the man in the face until she heard his nose crack. The man yelled in pain and let go of the wire. Paige pushed away from him as he swung at her with one hand. The swings were in vain. His other hand held his nose, and he couldn't see too well from the blood splashing in his eyes. He missed and hit the wall hard. As he let out another scream of pain, Paige took her chance and tried to run. Paige went to run away, but he grabbed her around the neck from behind. Hush squeezed in anger, but Paige tried not to panic and focus. She remembered what Nate taught her. She could hear Nate's words in her head, clearly guiding her. "Keep calm and focus." Paige used the wall to walk up halfway, and then with all her might, she pushed off. The two flew back into the island that was in the middle of the kitchen, the marble corner going into Hush's back. The force and the pain made him let go of her, and Paige seized her opportunity. Paige reached up and grabbed a big iron skillet. She then whacked Hush in the head as hard as she could. The male fell to the ground hard. In a screaming anger, Paige then got on top of him and started beating him with the pan over and over. She finally stopped when she couldn't lift her arms anymore. Paige slowly stood up straight, looking down at what she did. The rage slowly left her, standing there with heavy breaths and hands shaking. The pan slipped from her hands and hit the floor. Paige was almost scared of herself and couldn't believe what she had just done. Paige's breath and heart rate were so frantic she almost didn't hear the phone ring. She ran to her purse, but it wasn't her phone that was ringing. Her head spun over to look at the bloody pile of a man that laid on her tile floor. It was the hitman's phone going off. Paige walked over the milk and blood mixture on the floor and squatted near him. Cautiously she reached into his coat and retrieved the phone. It was a text message from an unknown number. "Be at the warehouse on 3rd Street in an hour." We caught the bull. Paige knew exactly where to go. She needed to help Nathaniel like he helped her when they first met. She owed him that much. Paige slipped the phone into her pocket and walked to the sink. She turned on the water and waited for it to warm up. Placing her hands in the warm water, the sink ran red from Hush's blood. She watched it circle down the drain as she tried to scrub off his death. Paige knew she couldn't let it get to her. She needed to keep her head if she was going to save Nate. Plus, it wasn't her fault. The woman was only defending herself.